Today, we're joined by a friend. She's a 32-year-old Lithuanian woman. She has spent 8 years in Japan, and she finally decided to go back home for good. So I thought it would be interesting to explore the reason why she decided to do so, also because I believe that her reason for leaving Japan are very revealing of what it means to actually live in Japan as a foreigner and what the real challenges are. So welcome, Ruta. The first question would be, so how did this idea of living in Japan started in the first place?
Actually, my reason for living in Japan was quite simple. I have been studying Japanese language and culture in my country, in Lithuania, because I was interested in languages, and Japanese sounded a bit more interesting than usual French. Still, while studying in university, I went for a short exchange program to Japan for the first time, and everything looked there completely different than in Lithuania or in Europe, and I liked it very much. And yeah.
I'm curious though, like, what were your expectations when you first arrived in Japan, or even before? What was the cultural references that you had, if you had any?
Actually, I wasn't watching a lot of anime or manga like many people who are interested in Japan, but I watched some movies about Japan. So I watched, well, in movies, it's usually a beautiful life in Japan, a family life, or I don't know, everyone's happy. And also when I went for the first time there, I was like a student and also like a tourist. So I saw just a nice side of Japan. Everyone was smiling, happily greeting me. And I thought that people are really happy in this country because, yeah, probably everyone notices that Japanese are always very polite and smiling and being nice. So I thought, what a nice country, because in Lithuania, people are sometimes sad, sometimes angry. You don't see such a happy faces. So yeah, this was like, I thought, oh, it would be great to live here. Everyone's so happy. So that's why.
This is very interesting because this is probably what everybody as a first impression has once starts either traveling in Japan as a tourist or are actually starting to live there. And that was probably very close to what my first impression was. But so my next question would be, was there an event when you first started to think, well, maybe this culture is a bit different and maybe too different from where I come from, or else where you thought, well, Japan is a very, very unique country, to put it mildly.
When I was a student, I didn't notice it that much, but there was one time when, well, we all students, foreign students, had our host families with whom we will spend weekends and going somewhere to the festivals or experiencing Japanese culture. Then my host family invited me a few times at home to have a dinner together or lunch, but I always noticed that there isn't a father at home. It's evening and they're having dinner, but father isn't still back home, and the wife would always say that he's still working, and so I didn't met the father at all. Then I had also other host family where I met a father, but I didn't met a wife because they were spending time like not together, like having different schedules, different lifestyles, and it was a bit strange for me because with the second family we were spending on Misaka. It's the end of the year, so I thought it's really strange because the father is just spending time with me and the other student, and his family is in a different room and spending time like not together. It was really something strange for me, and I thought that what's happening with Japanese families? It's a bit different than in Lithuania. After my studies, I was a bit confused what to do next after master's studies, because I could go back to Lithuania or I could stay in Japan and try working here. So at that time, I felt that until now I was just studying and just meeting professors, students, and I didn't experience the life of like usual Japanese, it's called shakaijin, when you start working, and yeah, what kind of life it is. And I really wanted to do that because I heard a lot of stories, but I didn't know how it is in a real life. So yeah, I decided at that time to try working in Japan, and I was also studying Japanology. So what could I do in Lithuania? Just do some translations, but not that much. And there were more opportunities in Japan. So yeah.
When did you start having or trying to have a relation, or if you ever even tried to have a relation with a Japanese person, with a Japanese guy? And if that happened, when was your first experience, and how did it go through? Where were the things that maybe didn't work out, worked out, or were different from where you were coming from?
So for me it was very funny, because at first when I first went to Japan, like Japanese men was completely different than Europeans, and they somehow looked quite cool for me. Like, and that happens to many Europeans at first time when they see Japanese, they have their own style, they are quite fashionable, and yeah, I really like them. The only problem for me was it's because I'm quite tall, but Japanese are not that tall, so it's always the problem of hate. But so I thought that I went for 2 weeks during my bachelor to Japan, and then when I came back, my friend in Lithuania told that she is having a pen friend from Japan, and he's coming to visit Lithuania. Would I like to help showing around the city? So we met, and he was quite tall, taller than me, and yeah, he was quite nice looking. And yeah, we didn't talk much because as I found out, he doesn't understand English at all. He was just writing with my friend, but yeah, we were talking a bit in Japanese. So yeah, he spent some days in Vilnius. We spent time together. Then we started, when he went back to Japan, writing with each other. Then he visited again me in Lithuania. So yeah, then we started dating. Then I went to Japan for 1 year studies, and yeah, we were like dating a bit. And then I don't know how, I was about 20 years old, something like that. And when I was going to go back home to Lithuania after 1 year studies, he decided to propose me all of a sudden. It was a bit like unexpected, and yeah, I was still feeling that I have a lot of things to do in life, and if I would marry just now, I couldn't continue my studies. It would be a bit difficult. Yeah, and he was actually a bit not very talkative. For me, it was also something strange, because for him it was okay just to sit silently and don't talk much. For me it was a bit I don't know, strange, but it's with many Japanese, I guess.
You probably thought, if I have to live 45, 50 years with this guy who doesn't talk, it's gonna have some problems somewhere on the
Yeah,
road.
exactly. Or he like does something unexpectedly one more time, like proposing something like that. Yeah, so it didn't work apparently. And yeah, there was some other Japanese. One was Catholic, because I am also Catholic, and I was going to the Catholic church in Japan, and we met there. So we also started to date. It was a bit difficult for me because he was shorter than me, and I thought that I can overcome this because he has the same faith as me. But it was, well, for me personally a bit difficult. Yeah, and he had a very traditional Japanese family. I mean that I don't know, they didn't communicate much, father and mother, and it was really strange atmosphere when we were spending time together. And I thought, if I really marry him, because he also proposed me after some time, yeah, it would be really a disaster probably. So yeah.
Basically, your first guy was a really tall guy, so was very exceptional in Japanese terms, but he didn't talk much, which is very typical for Japanese. But the other guy was really short, which is very typical for Japanese, but he was Catholic, which is atypical for Japanese. So you didn't seem to really get the full package there. But I guess, you know, it's harder. So from there, where were your, but the other thing is also, these two guys proposed in a very short time. That also really, like, you found it very, very strange.
Yes, I guess because both of them were older than me. So the first one was like about the age, average age in Japan when you are supposed to get married. So he was a bit in a hurry because there's such a, I don't know, 30 or something. If you don't marry, then it can become difficult. And he was also very very much in love, so yeah, that's why. And the other one was also a bit older and thinking about the family, kids, and was also in a hurry. I guess that's why. And also because I was a foreigner, so for them it's really difficult to find a foreigner who would like Japanese men. So yeah, they wanted just to,
No, but it makes sense because you're like, well, I only met two. Both of them proposed me, so you thought, you know, there's around 60 million Japanese guys around somewhere, maybe less if you discount the age. But the thing is, you thought, well, I definitely have a good chance here to meet somebody, and it made sense. I mean, logically, it did make sense. So how did it actually go?
Actually, after some time, I noticed that it's not. I somehow can't be in, I don't know, can't make relationships with Japanese men because something doesn't work, something I don't understand, something what from their culture, and it's somehow a bit boring. I also have my own humor sense and their way of joking, and sometimes they don't joke at all. So it was a bit, I don't know, difficult for me. And at some point I decided to quit with Japanese men and I don't know, date not Japanese in Japan.
The other funny thing that I know, because we talked about this, is that when you every time you maybe wanted to talk to some guy inside a cafe or somewhere, then you would approach them like in a very friendly fashion, but somehow they would take your approach as something else. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, exactly. In cafes, or there also used to be some kind of like international meetings between foreigners and Japanese, and always, no matter if they start to talk with me or I start to talk with them in Japan, if a female and a male starts talking with each other, it means that they're interested in each other, because probably many Japanese say that like men and women cannot be friends, so Japanese understand it like that. So that's why like all friendships except one in Japan with men like ended not in a like casual friendships for me.
But what would you say? What would you say if you have to, like, if somebody would ask you out of the blue, what was the most disappointing thing about your experience in Japan? It doesn't have to be one thing. It could be even two or three things. What would be the first thing that would come to your mind?
Mm, maybe like relations between people, not necessarily relationships or love, but also between friends. Like Japanese have like quite I don't know, they it's very difficult to get close to Japanese, and in my country, also probably in yours, even much more. We are used to quite close relationship, and for Japanese, they're always like keeping a distance between, and even with a very good friends, at some time you notice that they're not that close as you would like them to be. So this was, I always felt somehow like alone in Japan, no matter that I had friends, my host family, I had like friends in the church, but all of them were somehow somewhere far away.
And what about, because that is very true. One of the consequences of that is that it's very hard, let's say, to share private problems or private concerns, something that happens daily here in countries like Italy, for example, where people just walking on the streets just share their last terrible experience, and they just release the stress just by talking to some friend, to somebody. And this doesn't happen in Japan. Do you think that is also a challenge when you are a foreigner, living in Japan?
Yeah, it's quite quite very like quite impossible to share very like I don't know.
Well, let's just say openly, the Japanese don't really like to talk about private things like, well, you could say, I mean, sexual things or sentimental things, or go into details that for a Westerner would be absolutely normal to talk about.
Yes, and it's like everywhere in Japanese society, even when you're dating someone, it takes quite a lot of time until you become really close, or you just don't talk, like in my case, and you're supposed to feel something, like Japanese say, read the air. Yeah, and yeah, it's really difficult because when you live in Japan, you are always like seen as like not Japanese, and this is quite like stressful for a foreigner. And when you don't have someone to share about your problems, you feel just even more like left alone or something like that. So after some time, it became a bit too much for me.
Also, what I found funny, I don't know if this is also your experience, but with other people that I talk to, is that the way they structure, so to speak, the dating, it's quite odd. It's quite different. Like I remember this. That it was I think a Taiwanese girl was telling me how every time she went on a date with a Japanese, she already knew what the steps were, just simply because every Japanese just followed them. So the first day would be just to go out, I don't know, in a cafe. The second day would be somewhere more like a eigakan, which is a movie theater, and then maybe a dinner. And then like on the third day, precisely on the third day, like a clock, she could count the minute. Then they would say "skiatte kudasai," which is a way of saying like let's be together. So to get the permission to get kissed, or to kiss them in that case. Did you feel this pattern at play when you went out with your dates?
Yeah, now when you say it, I didn't know this pattern when I was dating my first Japanese boyfriends, but yeah, actually, yes, like everything has to be in like according to the rules, like all Japanese society. And yeah, if you don't say "tsukiyatte kudasai," let's date, then you can't like hold hands or kiss or do something else. Yeah. And also this date when you say "tsukiyatte kudasai" has to be a bit special. You go to a better place to eat than usual, and something like that. Yeah.
Did you ever notice like they really care a lot about taking, like you mentioned, a girl to not so much a very good place, but a place that it's considered to be good. So if a date, is, like you mentioned, like a special date where you can say that phrase "tsukiyatte kudasai," it has to be a French restaurant somehow. I don't know why, but somebody's decided some years ago there has to be a French restaurant, can be a pizza, because otherwise it looks cheap. But it just makes no sense to me. But anyway, and other things like this. Have you noticed this? Have you noticed that the Japanese guys do really tend to impress women by showing basically, the material wealth?
Yes, yes, actually, you're right. You noticed that very well, because in Japan, the social status is very important. So when Japanese like some woman or a girl, they first try to impress them, if they are still students, about how good they are studying, and what a good students they are, and what future they are planning. And when they are already working, they try to impress women about their job and how much they earn, also about their clothing, that they're wearing brand things, and yeah, everything. And also these French restaurants as well, some small presents from famous shops, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and the other thing is like when you say, well, then what the woman has to offer. Well, the way I see it is that I don't know if you ever noticed this, but being in many different places in Japan, especially in tourist places, you can see these young couples walking down the streets. And there's one thing that I really noticed is that the faces of these young women, they're all the same. So it's like there is this concept of kawaii, of being cute, that it's incredibly standardized, and everybody's looking for that. I had a friend, tell you the story. This was in Yufuin, was in Kyushu, and this guy was a quite, I thought it was quite good looking guy. He's a Japanese guy, and he was just broke up with a girl. Was extremely good looking actually, and so he was like kind of a desperate, like trying to look for another one. And I remember, like, we were just walking together around this very touristic town, trying to approach some people, talk to them. He wanted to know somebody, but then he always went and focused on these girls that had the same face. They all had the same kawaii face. And at one point I told him, look, man, I mean there's not just one beauty standards, but apparently it seems for the Japanese there's only one beauty standards. And you see it even more with the girls that they somehow don't end up being in a couple relationship. And if you really look at them, the 30-year-olds, the 30 and over year olds, they somehow don't belong to that cutie kawaii standard. And it's funny. It's like they are the so-called leftovers, so to speak. But I mean, it's a bit of a strong word, but it really seems like that, though. Have you noticed this?
Yeah, I noticed this kawaii culture, and actually I was very interested in it. I was even planning to write my thesis in kawaii culture, then I changed it actually. But yeah, and when I first came to Japan, I was always very interested in fashion, and in Japan it was everything just kawaii, so I was also a bit kawaii at first, and then I decided that it doesn't suit me. Yeah, and like all Japanese women are kawaii, that is a bit childish. They speak like kids, act a bit like childish, and this is supposed to be very like I don't know, nice, sexy from Japanese point of view. And I was always told that I wasn't kawaii, and I was also always told that I'm otonarashi. That means that I look like an adult, and this was actually like not a compliment, because if you look like an adult, you are not kawaii, childish. Then it means that well, you are not like this kawaii. You don't have this standard.
You really got on a very hot point there, because I've actually wrote up extensively about this, and it's and this is it's where it gets very near the border of something quite dark, if you want to say it that way. And that means where the attraction for something kawaii becomes the attraction for something that it's basically just looking young or too young. Speaking from a point of view of the legal system, which apparently now they have lowered the age of consent to 18 years old, which created all sorts of problems that I talked in my previous video. When you have this culture that basically awards girls, when they again talk with this very childish voice, they act childish. And even we know this happens all the time, constantly in the anime. Even Miyazaki, the famous director of the famous studios, which I lived very close by in Mitaka, he complained about this, how it doesn't make sense that all the girls in the anime industry have this kawaii. It's not even kawaii; it's like really childish voice.
Yeah, I guess so, because if you don't know that, you just act normally, and some foreigner woman decides to act like a bit like a Japanese, because they like Japanese men and want to find a partner. So yeah, they try to dress like anime characters and speak a bit more kawaii. Yeah, I didn't want to do that much.
So basically, your final options in front of you was like, should I become more childish in the way I speak and the way I look, or else I just leave Japan? And you basically seems like you decided to just leave Japan, which it turned out to be good. If I may like just disclose some of your privacy, but you actually, as soon as you left Japan, you did find a few partners that found the fact that you were more otona rashiku, like you were more adult, like. A plus and not a minus.
Yeah, I could be finally myself. Because that kawaii is so present in Japanese society. You even have to talk in this childish voice when you are working in a Japanese company, because like even when you talk in Japanese, my voice also changes a bit, and my my family says that I talk like a kid. So yeah, I had to.
Why the need, not so much of the woman to speak like that, but why the men require that? Could there be a reason why men would prefer somebody who looks and acts childish? I'm just gonna throw it in there. Could there be anything to do with self-confidence? The fact that they could definitely feel superior to somebody who acts and speaks childish because that's the place they choose to be in the relationship. You don't even have to specify. If somebody talks as a child, then you treat them like a child.
Yeah, I think that it could be true, because it didn't used to be like that in, I don't know, our parents or our grandparents' generation in Japan, because at that time Japanese women wasn't allowed to speak at all. So then this all anime and manga culture started, and there was this childish character. So Japanese woman was finally allowed to speak, but just in childish voice.
Do you see a positive trend there? Like something is changing for the better, or?
Well, some people say so, and I noticed some tendencies, because, but they are not good as well, because nowadays there are like women who are very like they care a lot about their career, and they decide not to marry at all. So these are strong Japanese women who decide that they don't need Japanese men, and they don't want to be a kid or not talk at all in the family. So yeah.
Those are the women that actually choose a pet instead of having a child, because I met tons of them, and I have to say this is probably the major problem in Japan. Like recently Elon Musk said that Japan, kind of obvious statement, but that Japan has an incredible problem concerning the population decreasing every year constantly. But one of the reasons is that this life choice about these women who cannot or decide not to get married, instead of having a child, they do decide to have a pet. And I say this because I really think a lot of them are very explicit about this. They do treat their pet like a child. And when you ask them about it, they do tell you that it's like my baby. They actually use these words. Would you think that would be an enough reason for a woman to actually decide, look, I'm independent, I'm autonomous, I don't need a man, and if I want, I can really easily even get my own child that it looks like a pet?
Well, I think that that's how things already work in Japan. I noticed that, especially even when Japanese marry, some of them don't want to have kids because it's very expensive and you don't have much time then for yourself. You have to raise them. There's a lot of social pressure when you raise children. So they just decide to have a pet because it's easier. And yeah, a lot of couples, or even like when you live alone, people have their pets and they really look like kids, and it's a bit crazy for me. I can't understand that because a pet is a bit different than a kid, but for Japanese it's apparently yeah. I remember one story that one of my Japanese friends, she was already in her 30s, and she met someone who was also searching for a wife, and he was even older than her, and he already had a pet because he was like, he thought that he won't find a wife, so he had a pet, and then they married and was living with that pet like their kid. So that's a successful story. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. It was fun. Okay.